Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to the 53rd episode of the Perfectly Imperfect Spiritual Podcast. I'm your host, Marta the Medium. I'm a psychic medium, angel card reader, and a spiritual teacher. And if you're watching it on YouTube or listening to this version of the podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcast, be sure to follow the show and leave a review and maybe like and subscribe. Okay, I am really so happy because today I am joined by the wonderful Taryn Nightingale. Taryn is a soul purpose priestess, psychic guide, and transformational coach who has given over 8,000 readings and mentored more than 50 coaches and healers. She's known for reading the unseen patterns that hold people back and guiding them into their highest timeline. Her work blends deep psychic insight with energy healing, soul alignment, and neurotransformation therapy, helping people live, love, and lead from their true power. Taryn, welcome. I am so excited to share this conversation with you.
Hello, I'm super happy to be here. And while you were talking, I could just feel my whole heart open up, which is often really a good sign for me that my soul is happy that I'm here. And that I definitely should be here. And it feels like that. So thank you. I'm glad to be here.
I'm very happy as well, and I can feel so much expansive energy in my solar plexus as well, like lots of yellow, lots of joy, and I know we are going to have a very meaningful conversation, and I trust the spirit world that we are going to share today, whatever our viewers and listeners need to hear.
Definitely. I'm on board.
Okay. Well, let's start. I don't like talking about beginnings, but I would love for you to share any of the stories that you would like to talk about before we dive into any of the powerful concepts you teach. So perhaps you could share one of the stories or like how you arrived on this path, and was there a moment where you knew you were being called into this work, a turning point that really changed? Well, I keep hearing everything for you.
Okay. So it's quite an interesting question because you say you don't like beginnings, but I funnily enough feel, and very important for me to say, that I think I was always meant to be doing the work that I'm doing. I know a lot of people go through a phase in their lives where they feel like they were maybe disconnected from physical reality and like who their true selves were. But I would say, and I want to use this word, lucky and blessed enough, that when I was a little girl, I got a lot of signs and symbols and signals. I want to use those words specifically around that. And I don't feel that people aren't given that. I just don't think they know how to read their own signs, symbols, and signals, which is a lot of the work that I do now, funnily enough, is teaching people how to trust their own self and how to be in conversation with their lives and the universe. And so when I was a little girl, I used to see a lot of spirit. So see very clearly. And often when we talk about seeing, and you're probably familiar with this yourself being a medium, people often think seeing, they get confused. They're like, what does that mean? So I'm a clairvoyant myself. They think that seeing is it has to be with the physical eye, but sometimes it can be with the mind's eye. And I had both as a little girl. And I thought this was the most normal thing because it was something that was happening to me on a very regular basis. So I'd see spirits in the different houses we lived as a child. And when I'd go to bed at night, I would astral travel. It was very natural for me to do. So it was something I did almost every night. My dream world was very lucid, very clear, vibrant. And I also knew how to play with my consciousness. So what I would do is I'd be able to move my consciousness from my body. And for example, one of the things I liked to do when I was a child was I would go and explore the fabric of the bed, and play in the duvet. And there's one distinct night that I remember as I was doing that, I was seeing the different fabric and the different particles of the fabric of the blanket that was on my bed. So, because this came very naturally to me as a child, I assumed that that was something that everybody was just doing.
Mm-hmm.
Little did I know that it wasn't what everybody was doing. And when I started sharing about that, I got a very strong defensive response from family members and my parents as well, and others around me. And then I started developing this awareness that, oh, I'm weird, that I'm
Mm-hmm.
not like everyone else. And then something that became very natural and was very natural to me, and that I didn't question and I played with and I completely trusted myself in that experience. I then started questioning it because of the fear of other people and their
Mm.
response to me sharing this. And I think this is an important story, not just in my own journey in terms of how I started relating to and with my gift, but also how it uh, created a perception that I then started taking on of myself. Yeah, so that's
Mm-hmm.
quite a pivotal story.
Yes. I'm curious, was there a particular family member perhaps who understood you, who with whom you were able to have the conversation, or who were those well, I want to say the word allies. I keep hearing my spirit guides. Who were those early allies or people who actually supported you and really encouraged you to carry on being your true authentic self and to not shut those, I don't like to say gifts, abilities, that part of yourself?
So I would say there wasn't any adults for
Mm.
that. I actually had a friend who she was older than me. And I don't know if you ever had one of these when you were at school, but those sort of girl crushes, when there's a girl that's older than you at school and you admire her and how she is and you kind of want to be like her. So I had a friend who was like that. And so I sort of looked up to her. She was like a big sister. But yeah, we went to the same school, and I was in what was grade 1. So I was 7 years old, and she was in grade 7. So she was about, and that's the South African schooling system, right? So she was about 12, 13. So I used to tell her about these things. And she gave me a lot of solace because uh, when I had shared that with my parents, they didn't know how to handle it. Fast
Mm-hmm.
forward, both my parents actually do have gifts, but I know you don't like using gifts, but have their own psychic ability and ability with spirit.
Mm-hmm.
But because of how their family had responded to it when they were a child, they kind of had their own fears around it. So I had spoken to this girl. Her name was Candace. I have no idea where she is now. I haven't seen her since. But she provided that for me and was the person that I could share this with. And yeah, she was there for me for that year that she was in her grade 7 year before she went off to high school. And I would say that's actually one of those key moments and periods in my life that defined, I think, my whole journey, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And what
Mm.
happened next? What happened next in terms of
Oh, well,
your
I
life
would say
story?
in after that, because I think the surrounding environment had a lot of fear around who I was, I then started adapting, right? What do we do as children? What do we do actually to survive our
Mm.
environments? We learn to adapt. And the body doesn't necessarily go like, oh, and especially when you're a child, like, is this going to help me in the future? The body is objective. So it just looks at what's going to work in the moment, what is going to help me survive. And what I then learned was, okay, don't talk about these things that you can do, and
Mm-hmm.
stop doing these things that you very naturally can do, and hide them because it's causing your outward environment to be fearful. And then because
Mm-hmm.
they're in fear, that's not allowing me to be so-called safe, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I started learning that, and then I adapted to what the environment needed me to do, which was I learned that my parents responded quite well to me doing well at school. So I
Mm.
didn't really try that hard. It was quite easy for me to do. I was a natural student, and I noticed my parents responded well to me. And so that was then something that I then continued to do. And I found approval and validation. And that's also what I believed, obviously, as a child, was a form of safety. Thus, a successful survival strategy.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that is something that probably played out. I wouldn't say probably, it's played out throughout my entire childhood, going into high school as well. Um, but then in high school, I also learned a very pivotal lesson around that. And I would say even into a lot of my adulthood. And I'd say only around my late 20s did I start questioning this. Like, this isn't really working. This works for other people to play into the dynamics and the environment of other people. But I started questioning whether it was actually serving me and what I really wanted and what my soul wanted and what I could feel in my heart wanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You
So it
want
feels it
me.
was a process. No, no, it feels like it was a gradual process of you, like almost like allowing yourself to be your true authentic self and almost bringing back power back to you. I'm curious whether you can talk about, because it feels to me, but correct me if I'm wrong, that there wasn't like one aha moment, but like you've started becoming more like conscious and aware. "Oh, this is actually who I am. It's serving me. I do not need those survival strategies. I have the sense of safety within me. So you either accept me who I am with all my gifts, or you can just leave me." So could you talk about that process?
Ooh, okay, so we're getting into it. So it's not actually. It wasn't. The way that you make it sound. I'm like sitting in. I'm like, oh, that sounds so lovely, because I imagine probably my soul's going like, yes, it was lovely like that, but the human experience of it wasn't like that. There was
Mm-hmm.
certainly very clear pivotal moments in my journey, and
Mm-hmm.
I can feel that I need to be quite frank about those.
Mm-hmm.
So what I would say is probably in high school there was actually, let's even go further than that, because this was when I started questioning the survival strategy. It was already as early as 12.
Mm-hmm.
I am a colored woman, so I say that because it's a very, very important part of my story. In South Africa, we have different racial groups, and I don't know if you're aware of the racial history in South Africa, which is quite important in terms of how people perceive themselves and how the even the current reality in our country is at the moment, right? And being colored is actually a minority group within South Africa, and I am part of that group, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a group of people where we a lot of mix, a lot of variety, and in actual fact, one of the minority groups in the world that has the biggest range of differences and different demographics in it. So when I was a little girl, I started school just after South Africa had become free, essentially. So I started school in 1994, which was when we were finally a free nation. But obviously, all that stuff from the past was still needing to be cleared out, right? We can decide to be free, but if we're not ready to look at really what was toxic, what was unhealthy, what got us to that place in the first place, we don't really fully heal yet, right? So when I was in my final year in primary school, and this was one of the crucial points in my life, was I had an experience with a principal and deputy principal at that time, where they were interviewing me to be the head girl at the school. And they had asked me, why would I want to be the head girl? And I had said to them, my 12-year-old self had said to them that I'd like to be a role model for the English and the colored people at the school, because I feel that we're a minority and a lot of the students feel that they've got to hide themselves and that they can't do well at school. And I would like to be an example of that they can and that they can succeed, and especially
Mm-hmm.
because of the history of our country. And I remember that moment actually like it was yesterday. funnily enough, I did some healing on this moment yesterday. And it was as though, and you know, being a sensitive person, you can feel when the energy shifts, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was as though the entire room just went dark.
Mm-hmm.
And in that moment of the room going dark, I felt as though I had said the wrong thing, as though me expressing my truth and why I really was there was not allowed, and it was not welcome. And the principal looked at me, and as everyone can see, I'm quite a light-skinned person. And he said, and I said to him, "As you know, sir, I'm colored, so this is why it's so important to me." And after I had said that, he said, "Could have fooled me." And I knew then, yep, the sense that I got was what I said wasn't allowed. And needless to say, I didn't become the head girl at the school, despite there being a lot of support for me and a whole series of events. But that moment shook me, because what it did was it made me realize, oh, wow, okay. So firstly, I
Mm-hmm.
had this experience of my gifts, these sensitive gifts, these being able to see the unseen, to explore with my consciousness, which was very freeing for me. That's not allowed. And oh, now I've learned that being a brown person, being a colored person is also not allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't really believe that, but that registered in my subconscious. And then when I went to high school, I experienced a similar kind of thing. Now, I was in a majority colored space because I specifically chose that for myself, because I wanted to avoid the same kind of pain. But then
Mm-hmm.
I faced a lot of judgment from the students in that space, because then they were like, well, you don't fit in because you look and sound like a white girl, essentially. So then I started getting asked about that. And then
Mm-hmm.
I was just like, what the heck? Like, where do I fit in? And
Mm-hmm.
that's then even more when, okay, let me do well. Let me do well. Let me do well at school, because then I'll get this validation. Then I'll have this place, right? Because then that became even more of the survival strategy. And then
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the year, the same thing happened. I was again up to be head girl for the school. And I again, same thing happened. I wasn't the head girl, I wasn't the deputy head girl. And the day after they made the announcement, the teacher in charge of the student body, the prefects, as we call them, she called me into her office and she said, I know you might be very upset, Taryn, about not being on the exec being now the head girl, head boy, deputy. And I said, yes, I definitely am, because I really tried and worked towards it. It was something I wanted, you know. And I think especially I wanted it as this high school student, because it was something that I didn't have as a child, at primary school. And she said, well, we decided to not choose you because you're too strong. Those were her words. And boom, there's that third one, right? You can't be too strong. You can't do too
Mm-hmm.
well. You can't speak up. You can't point out things. You can't say, you can't be a leader. You mustn't be too strong. Don't be too strong. And I think by that time I was 17 years old. And I think that's when I started getting really disillusioned by the world, to be honest. And that was a big moment in my life. And then I would say shortly after that, I had another experience where I also did very well at school, and wanted to be the top in my school. And I had a big disappointment around that. So I would say, for me, I suffered a series of disappointments around being successful, around being your true self, around using your true voice, around being who you really are. And they came in quick succession as a child, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love to say that I had a lot of teachers or family members come in and support me. But I would say there were a couple who were there, but there was no one who ever came and really took me and held me as a child and went like, how are you doing with all of these experiences?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was because of being a strong person and a strong personality, and because I was doing well. So I would say the assumption from the adults in that space was obviously that, well, she's doing well and she's still strong and she's still going on. So surely she's fine, right? But I would say deep inside, I think I was very, very sad as a high school student, and I was coping with it by eating a lot, really eating, and gaining lots of weight quite rapidly in my high school years, which I would say would be a sign, right? And then I would say in my early 20s, and this was a big moment for me, I got into an abusive relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And this was around about 23, 24. And it was the absolute lowest point in my life. And I didn't know how I got there because
Mm-hmm.
I was this perfect A plus student taking part in all these activities. Nobody ever needed to help Taryn, you know. Taryn graduated top in her class at university. I went to study drama because I was like, I don't want to do what society wants me to do. My heart wants to be a performer. And that I would say was a pivotal moment, because what happened was, it was after the first incident, and anyone who's ever been in an abusive relationship or an abusive dynamic knows, especially once you're out of it and you can see it for what it is, that there's those little things that happened before, but then there's that one incident that happens where you kind of realize, oh my goodness, this is actually where I'm at.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually in this situation. And that was after the first physical assault that I experienced.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, are your viewers comfortable with me going into the details on this?
Absolutely. I used to be in an abusive relationship myself, and I openly talk about it. And I have so many followers that are women who are about to leave abusive relationship. I work with women, helping them to really tap into their authentic self. So whoever is not comfortable, they are very welcome to pause this conversation. But yeah, we welcome. Well, I'm talking on behalf of my spirit team and myself. Anything that you want to bring to this conversation. So yes, please.
Yeah, and I love that you've said that, because I can feel the importance in myself even before saying this. You know, that often we don't talk about how difficult the details of things, because we're afraid that it would maybe scare or trigger people. But I think sometimes it's actually incredibly important that we
Yes.
recognize that, because if we don't voice it, right? If we don't go,
Mm-hmm.
I was hurt, I was
Yes.
violated, then it doesn't register for us, right? It doesn't register in our brain. It doesn't register in our nervous system. We kind of push it to the back of our minds, and we just want to get over that reality, but we can't really get over what we haven't allowed ourselves to fully accept and recognize as truth. And I work with a lot of psychics. I train psychics, right? And I also help people with their intuition. And one of the things that I like to say, and sorry, I've digressed, but I will go back to that story, is the understanding of our heart in terms of our intuition, but also when our heart develops right in the womb, one of the next parts that develop is actually the ear, right? And a lot of people don't
Mm-hmm.
know this. And if we and the intuition works with the heart and the ear, so it's the feeling, knowing what's going on in the heart, but also being able to listen. So if we don't voice the
Mm-hmm.
negative and the positive, we don't hear it, and we need to. We need to,
Mm-hmm.
because our intuition, which is also our inner knowing, our deeper knowing, our truthful knowing, our soul's knowing, if we don't voice that, our bodies and our nervous system, our human doesn't hear that. So that's just an important thing that I really want to stress, just for myself and anyone who's listening to this, because we have to speak it and hear it, whatever that is, for ourselves. So that night, to go back to this first violent incident, I was actually in a very difficult space. My brother was in an incredible accident where he had actually burned half of the side of his face. So that was incredible, and we had nearly lost him at the time, so that was a very difficult time. And I was now dating this abusive person who now had become my only friend. I was living in a different city to my family. So I was really leaning on this person for a lot of support. And if you're in a difficult space and there's no one else around you, when someone gives you that cracker in the desert, that cracker is the most delicious cracker, And I had been feeling really bad, and he insisted that I come to what we call in South Africa a braai, which is kind of a barbecue. But a braai and a barbecue is not the same. Anyone who's South African will know that. You've got to try a braai in South Africa to know what it's like. And I didn't want to go, but I went because I thought, okay, I'm going to feel a little bit better. And that night, we had gotten into an argument about something that was very silly. And then he didn't want to speak to me anymore. And I got really upset because I was like, so now you're going to do silent treatment on me, which in an abusive relationship, one of the things that happens, right? You can't speak. You're not allowed to be upset. And I think a lot of who've experienced abusive relationships, whether it's just emotionally or any sort of toxic relationship, one of those tactics is that you're not allowed to speak, you're not allowed to have a voice, which is nonsense. You completely are. And I had then said to him, I'm upset with you and I don't like that you're avoiding me like this. And he did not like me standing up to him. And he grabbed me by the throat, and that's where it had started. And that led into strangling me, to dragging me down a corridor, pulling me by my hair, to throwing my clothes out, throwing me outside, to biting my finger. It was ridiculous. And I was in a lot of shock after that incident, went home. And then a week or two later, after I had now relaxed and the reality of things came to mind, this person had reached out, apologizing, wanting to see me again, saying, oh, they're so sorry, And I knew that I shouldn't go and see that person again or go and speak to them again. And I said yes to meeting up with him. And the moment I had said yes, I could feel all of that self-betrayal in my body. And that's crucial. It was the self-betrayal that I felt in my body. And I pushed it away. I pretended that I didn't betray myself. And I just went back and I found myself with that man for the next 3 years. And you know the story. But speaking about that now, what is key around that was everything that had happened in my childhood had taught me to survive. Don't listen to yourself, right? Don't be yourself. Don't listen to your voice. Don't listen to your truth. Enough of society had kept mirroring that back to me. So even though I could feel that sense of self-betrayal in that moment when I had said, yes, I'm going to meet up with this person who had clearly violated me, I didn't listen because I'd gotten so used to not listening to myself. And when I had listened to myself, it wasn't safe. So from a safety and logic perspective, or logic perspective in my body, that was the best route of action. But it wasn't. And I think it was then through that abusive relationship, going into all of that, that's when I started realizing my own shadow and what I'd experienced and how I'd been suppressing myself for such a long time. And then my gifts started showing themselves again. Then I started seeing spirit. I started hearing spirit. I started feeling it. I started getting more in touch. I started becoming a lot more aware of energy. And what brought me out of that was listening to that. And I had never worked with a chakra system ever in my life. But I started doing yoga because that felt like the most natural thing to do. And then while I was doing yoga, I started imagining my chakras. I just started seeing them naturally,
Mm-hmm.
spontaneously. And I started focusing on bringing energy into my chakras while I did yoga. So when I did yoga, that's what I did. And then I started doing hot yoga, and I would go to that quite often. It became part of my routine, and I started healing myself that way. And there was one beautiful moment in a hot yoga class where I stood in front of the mirror and I saw my aura, and it was big and beautiful and purple and pink. And I saw it with my own eyes, and it was one of the most beautiful things that I'd seen. And then I knew that I had started reclaiming myself. So it was energy work and actually trusting my own understanding. Nobody had taught me about energy work. It was something that had come from within me.
Mm-hmm.
And then that started really, 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 really just unfolding for me from that space. And I would say that probably was the one of the it was the crucial moment in me coming back home to myself, coming back home to my ability, coming back home to start listening to myself, and really coming back home to choosing my own path and being a lot more decisive about that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Do you
could
think
say
you
more.
could? No, no. One question that I would like to ask you: would you be able to share with the viewers and listeners how did you manage to leave that abusive relationship? What helped you? What was the process of you arriving home, as you've mentioned? Because for anyone who's maybe still stuck in an abusive relationship and they don't really know, or maybe because of that conversation, I hope some viewers and listeners will become aware that this is maybe an abusive relationship, because that's the other thing that we might not be
Yes,
aware. If you
yes,
could talk a little bit about that, because I think it will be very helpful.
definitely. Very, very happy to talk about that. So when so there's two things you've basically asked me, right? So let's deal with
Mm-hmm.
the first part, which was when I realized that I needed to leave, and what helped me leave was I actually started paying attention to how I felt. That was the
Mm-hmm.
most important thing. I started asking myself, like, hang on, like, how am I feeling? I'm not happy. I'm not happy. How do I feel when I'm around this person? I feel unsafe. I'm constantly waiting for the next thing to happen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't trust them. When they tell me they love me, I recognize that I don't believe them. So it was also the feeling part, and starting to listen to my feelings, but then also starting to listen to actually what I was thinking about the situation. And then
Mm-hmm.
starting to listen to the fact that my mind was constantly doing this. I would be like, this isn't good. And then I go like, no, 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 it's not them. I can be better. No, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
no, but this isn't, no, 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 I need to fix this. And when I started noticing that I was constantly questioning myself,
Mm-hmm.
that also started making me go, but is this how it is in a healthy relationship? And for anyone who's in that space, because I know when you're in that space, you need someone to tell you, no, in a healthy relationship, you are not constantly questioning yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Your feelings are validated. You are heard. So that was a very difficult thing for me to understand because of my childhood as well. And I felt that that was so normal. It was so normal for me to not to dismiss myself, that it was really difficult for me being in the abusive relationship to think that, hey, having a voice, having my feelings heard, having my thoughts heard, that was actually the right thing, the healthy thing.
Mm-hmm.
So what I started doing was I started actually writing about my feelings.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started writing about my feelings, right, I gave voice to them, which is the important thing. I started writing about them. And then I started talking to myself and going, hey, Taryn, how do you feel? And I started listening to how I was feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Once I started giving voice to that, that started giving me courage to go, actually, so now what do I want? And when you're in an abusive relationship, right, it takes so much out of you that at that
Mm-hmm.
point I had stopped working. I had gone into a deep depression. And so I started looking at the things that I really wanted. And then I started performing at a theater company, and that was really helpful. But I was still in the abusive relationship because you know that on off cycle. And that's what I was doing. And then the breaking point for me was when I actually decided that when I really, really left, because it's that process. There's that like leaving, wanting to leave, then you leave, then you come back, and then you leave and you come back. The breaking point for me was when I recognized that I had been giving too much, and that the problems in the relationship were not all mine, and that
Mm-hmm.
a healthy relationship requires another person to take on responsibility for their things and their problems. And when I got to that realization,
Mm-hmm.
that was when I could leave. And I think what happens with a lot of women who stay, and this is the funny thing, right, is that people often think that women who are in abusive relationships or toxic relationships, because maybe sometimes abusive can push away the very people who are in unhealthy relationships,
Mm-hmm.
even a toxic relationship, right, where there's unhealthy dynamics, is that a lot of the time people think that the strong woman, the intelligent woman, the achiever, the successful woman,
Mm-hmm.
why would she be in a space like that? She's
Mm-hmm.
intelligent. She can
Mm-hmm.
clearly see that this
Mm-hmm.
isn't the right space for her, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I say a lot of the time, it's exactly those women who find
Mm-hmm.
themselves in that space. And the reason is because they're problem solvers, because they're intelligent, because they can handle more and take on more, they end up even taking on a lot of the time unhealthy partners' problems and trying to fix that. And then doing that actually end up sacrificing their mental well-being and their own emotional well-being. So the justification often for the very intelligent, very successful, high achieving, often very confident, right, women is that, well, I can handle this. And
Mm-hmm.
if I can handle it, then I mean, like, surely it's not bad. If I can handle it, surely it's not as bad as I maybe think it is. And that's often the justification. And I think that's why a lot of uh, successful women actually end up staying in unhealthy relationships and in toxic environments. And also, a lot of the time, why even their external support structures, like their family and friends, don't even maybe recognize the situation they're in.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing.
It's, I want to say it's a pleasure, but it actually feels like the right thing to say at this time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. It's a very important conversation, and I'm so grateful for you and for sharing your story and for really opening your heart. Even when you mentioned, because we've only got to know each other, and as you were talking about your story, I started crying, and I could feel like the pain of that little girl, the Taryn. And then you moved on to sharing the story of being in that abusive relationship, and I was getting chills, validation from spirit world, and I just wanted to hug that little Taryn. And if we were in person, then I would really hug you. And I know you don't need that, but I keep hearing from the spirit world and from some of your loved ones in spirit how proud they are for you overcoming it. And I'm like, wow, wow. Yes, yeah. Well, I'm, yeah, also So, well, proud of you as another woman who went through that abusive relationship. But the fact that you're giving your story a voice as well, it just means the world to me, with a hope that other women are going to start sharing their stories, because by sharing our truth, by sharing our pain, we are able, I truly believe, to transmute it. And what you've been beautifully describing, like that connection of the heart space to, I'll call it the third eye, because I work with so many people where they're like disconnected, so their throat chakra gets like closed because they're not speaking their truth, but also the heart says one thing, the logical mind says the other one, and then there's that disconnection. So with that, I know we'll be able to move, or we can keep coming back and forth to that psychic abilities and the mediumship abilities, because I truly believe heart space is the bridge to the spirit world. And I just hope with that conversation, the viewers and listeners are going to allow to trust themselves, to listen to their heart, and to know that our hearts know the truth. Yeah.
It's an interesting thing that you bring up, this thing around trust, right? Because we trust, when we think of trust, we often think of safety. And if we've grown up in a space where we haven't been almost allowed to trust ourselves because it wasn't safe, which was
Mm-hmm.
definitely my experience. We've got to find that and this is one of the first things that I teach the women and also men who work with me, is how do I find a home in myself?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about where you're living, the first place you're living is in your body. It's in your environment. Your first environment is in your body. So when you're experiencing trust, it can be quite a triggering thing for a lot of people, and a journey on really how to trust, because it can be so layered. The one of the biggest ins that I always like to go with is like, what is really happening in your body? What are you
Mm-hmm.
feeling? And that's emotionally, but also really, really in the body. And that for me has been one of the key identifying factors of assessing a dynamic and assessing a space, right? And when I say space, I mean whether that is being in another community, another online space, a workplace, whatever that is. Because your home, your environment, your body is going to give you a lot of clues. Because I'll tell you, as much as I got out of that abusive relationship, there was still healing that needed to happen afterwards, right? Healing in
Mm-hmm.
terms of understanding that getting out of the relationship is one, but then really unpacking what has happened and what that has meant for you. Because now you need to learn how to choose a new path. And that's a lot of the work that I do. It's like, okay, so we've gotten there, but now how do you choose your path? How do you choose your authentic path? How do you walk it? Because if it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't safe to walk before, how do you walk it now? And the body gives us a lot of information around that, and really starting to trust that as home, because that is where the first home starts. That is where your world will begin. It's you and you being at home with you, right?
Mm-hmm. And what advice would you give to anyone who doesn't feel safe, who are not, because I remember it was a year ago. Was it a year ago? I never remember time, but let's say it was a year ago, and I decided I'm not going to be working with that therapist anymore, because I was like relieving my trauma, and I felt like spoken therapy, it served its purpose, but I thought enough. But I burst into tears during one of our last sessions, because I needed, I truly believe no matter whether you're a psychic medium or like, it's really nice to be able to work with mentors and to receive kind of support for yourself. So I kept being supported, but I realized during that pre-ultimate session, I have created the sense of safety within, and I started sobbing and I'm getting tears because I remember when I started working with, she was a drama therapist, and we started working before I left an abusive relationship, and I
Yes.
just couldn't, I had no memories of safety. She would ask me, oh, go back to your childhood. I'm like, my childhood was abusive, dysfunctional, I have nothing. Find your like bring yourself to happy memories. I'm like, I have no happy memories. So I wasn't
Mm.
able to find anything. And then my body felt distant. I was like really numb. So it was a process. So initially, I started visually, well, through meditation and visualization, I've created a sacred garden, and somehow that allowed me with, by me connecting to my spirit team, um, to connect to my body. But it was that awareness, because I've never thought, if you're watching it or listening, because maybe you feel threatened, I've never thought that I would be able to feel safe within myself. And last year I felt like I am feeling safe, and that home is within.
Mm.
And that realization was beautiful. So, with that digression and a little bit of my own personal story, the question for you is like, if for anyone who wants to create the sense of safety within, what advice would you give them? How can they start?
I'd always say start small. Start small. When we try and do things that are too big for us, right, it can become very overwhelming. So what I did and what I found was really useful is like go with, if I don't feel safe in my body, so what do I like? Is there something that I
Mm-hmm.
like, right? And one of the things for me is I really like a good cup of tea.
Mm-hmm.
So and that would be then make my tea a particular strength, and we drink milk in our tea here in South
Mm-hmm.
Africa. So we drink black tea with milk,
Mm-hmm.
and then having that black tea, and then going, so I really like this, to then take that and sit with that and see what is it that I like, right? What is it
Mm-hmm.
giving? And then once I can connect to that, then I know even that little thing that's creating like a little pocket of safety, even if that's just having that 5 minutes, and then to be in tune with those 5 minutes of that cup of tea,
Mm-hmm.
right? Then I'm already creating an awareness of what that feels like in my body. And then from there, you then can cultivate a greater awareness of other things. So then once I started becoming aware of that, I was like, okay, well, I also like walking on the beach. That
Mm-hmm.
creates safety. And then from that, oh, I really love swimming in the freezing cold tidal pools. Not everyone likes that, but I love that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So my guidance to someone who doesn't feel safe in their body is like, okay, that's fine. Don't stress yourself out about that.
Mm-hmm.
Write a little list of the little things that you like,
Mm-hmm.
even if it's just feeling the sun on your face, even if it's just like I said, the cup of tea. If
Mm-hmm.
that's like talking to a particular person, we can all find just, even if it's that one thing, and then allow yourself that. And then from there, create little safe spaces for yourself. And the
Mm-hmm.
more you start doing that, the more you'll start trusting yourself, because now your body's going, oh, you've created a bit of safety here. And then you do it
Mm-hmm.
again. And then you do it again. And you do it again. So little bit by little bit by little bit. There was one stage for me, the only thing that I could think of was like having a shower,
Mm-hmm.
because it's that warmth and like taking care of myself in that way, the most simple thing, but really just giving myself that shifted a lot of things for me. So for anyone who's struggling, that's what I would suggest.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And yeah, it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be just something simple. And we do drink tea with milk in Scotland. I'm originally from Poland, but I've been
Oh,
here for 17, 18 years. And I do love cup of black tea with milk. And I have that Neuro pathway that brings that sense of safety. And I just love it.
yeah, yeah.
Mm. Okay. Well, I'm looking at your beautiful title, Soul Priestess. This is such a powerful title. Could you share what being a priestess means to you?
So for me, what that means is fulfilling the practices of whatever it is that I'm a priestess of, right? And so when I say soul priestess, it's like looking at the practices that I do that help bring more of the soul into the physical realm. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how I'd simply put it. So for someone who is say they call themselves an earth priestess, what are the
Mm-hmm.
practices that they do that honor the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
That show the beauty of the earth, the
Mm-hmm.
sacredness of the earth, the importance of it. And so
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the work that I do is about how do we bring the soul into the body? How do we work with the soul? How do we connect with the soul? How do we follow the path of the soul? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the some of the practices? Yeah, can you talk about well connecting to our soul? And
So
yeah.
yes, I'm
No,
sorry.
no. Well, no. Well, I wanted to mention a little bit more about the soul path. Like, how do you help like your clients, people you support with, to um, well, I don't want to make sure that. Well, I don't want to say that you put them. They don't put themselves on the right soul path, but maybe they become aware what their soul path really is. So yes, yeah.
Yes, that's an important thing to say because a lot of the time people might think that, well, if I'm not on my soul path, like then where is my soul? And that's an important thing to remember. You're all always connected to your soul, right? So
Mm-hmm.
yes, it's about creating an awareness of that. So what I find in with a lot of the people that I work with is that there's a disconnect between their spirituality and their human life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their spirituality exists in a box, and the experience of this spiritual exists also in a box. And then they've got their human life, their physical reality, which is usually where they go to work, how they actually interact with their partner, how they look after their kids, the type of money they earn. And I say the type of money they earn because often you'll find that maybe it's someone who's in a corporate job or even running their own business, but then they don't feel necessarily aligned with that on a deeper soul level, right? But they think that money and their job and those kind of, let's say, earthly matters are separate to the spiritual, separate to the soul,
Mm-hmm.
right? So they put that in a box. And then they might not have, they often don't have those two realities overlapping. Uh, and what they will do then is find themselves then in their spiritual spaces and in their spiritual communities where they do allow themselves that, but they don't let these two parts of their life work together and marry and exist with one
Mm-hmm.
another. But the soul path is our life, right? Is what
Mm-hmm.
we're doing. It is part of our, even that corporate job that you hate, right?
Mm-hmm.
That narcissistic boss that you have, a lot of that is part of your soul work. And what I do with people is teaching them how to marry the two. How do you
Mm-hmm.
work with your what you think is your physical reality and think that is actually separate to that? How do we take our spiritual practices and actually make them practical? How do we connect with them and allow them actually to exist within our daily lives where we don't find ourselves separated? And there's working with the mind in a particular way around that, right? But then
Mm-hmm.
also working deeper on an emotional level and also working with the body. So yeah, that's essentially what I do with people when we do work like that. What I would say is if we were to work with a simple practice of that for someone that someone could apply right now,
Mm-hmm.
you're in a situation, say, for example, you have a narcissistic boss. I would ask, and it's a very simple thing, is to just ask yourself, why am I here?
Mm-hmm.
Why am I here? What is this teaching me? Because once you do that, you actually open up yourself to higher consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what a lot of people do is when they separate their paths, their spiritual, or they separate these aspects of their lives, their spiritual and their physical reality, what they do is when they're in their so-called physical reality, they're often living unconsciously and just becoming sort of like a victim of what's happening to them. But when you ask yourself, why am I here? You're inviting that spiritual aspect to come in and give you an answer, for that higher guidance to start coming in. And that already starts creating a bridge between the two. So that, I would say, is a simple practice that someone could start with if they want to just slowly start bringing more of their soul and their higher consciousness into what is their daily life, their normal humdrum sort of routine, right?
In your work, you also talk about Matrix avatar. I have to ask about it. What is the Matrix avatar, and how does it affect the way we live?
So your matrix avatar. So when I talk about the matrix, that's what I'm talking about what we've been taught about the physical world, right? So, for example, if I use my own story about achievement is the way to success, I have to make money, I have to make so much money, and then that's going to make me super happy. If I'm in a happy relationship, I behave like this, right? We're told about like what a relationship is. So the ideal relationship is often getting married and having kids, or that commitment. And yeah, there are some schools of thought that's opening up to different ways of viewing things. That is there, right? But then you've got these other kind of conditionings and programs, which is if I'm happy in a relationship, maybe I'm always giving, I'm always nice, I'm always pleasant. And that's what a happy relationship looks like, right? I'm not actually talking about how I really feel or what I really think or what's really happening for me. So that would be the matrix, right? What has society conditioned us to believe about money, about our jobs, about our relationships, about the type of work that we're doing? I'll go into a bit of a deeper example around that, because when people talk about their purpose, they often think their purpose then has to be this huge, big thing of maybe they're completely giving of themselves and they need to be like this enlightened being or this Buddha or whatever it is. And that purpose needs to have this massiveness about it, this big thing around it, right? Even that in itself is a conditioning, is a program. So there's all of these conditionings, these programs that exist within the bigger concepts and bigger ideas of what the matrix is. So if we want to keep it simple, think of the matrix, right? You're in front of your computer. When Neo sits in front of he gets plugged into him. So what's been plugged into your mind about how things should be, right? Should be. That often gives us a big clue as to when we're functioning from conditioning. I think I must be like this. I need to be like this. I should be like this. This is the best thing, right? All of those give us clues into that. So that's the matrix. Then your avatar, right? If you think about your avatar when you're picking maybe you're playing a game and you've got to pick an avatar, or you're even, like those pictures that we had on social media, like there was a stage where I think it was Facebook and the iPhone also had like, you could do like an avatar, like a cartoon kind of view of yourself. Same kind of thing. What is the cartoon, the mask version of ourselves that we create to fit within this conditioned reality, to fit within what we've been programmed? So who is the character we play in this matrix? And that is what our matrix avatar is. So for me, if you think about my story, mine was being the top A student who did all of the things, who never needed help from anyone, and who was constantly able to achieve and was always switched on, and the person who took responsibility for everything and showed up for everyone. That was my avatar. And that's how I learned to function within the matrix.
So is matrix avatar like our false self?
I'd say so. Yeah.
And what happens, or what has happened to you when you stepped beyond this? If you can talk about any emotions or any feelings, what you've experienced.
So it's very interesting because I don't believe that there's one version of me. And I think that people need
Mm-hmm.
to be mindful of that, is they often think that their true self is this one part of
Mm-hmm.
themselves that they're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So I do just want to put that out there as a caveat to all of this, because that's also a trap and is often also a program, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you've got to figure what are you essentially identifying with. And what I like to identify with is more my soul, which is why I also do the work of a soul priestess, which is that my soul knows that I can take on different forms as my reality moves and as I
Mm-hmm.
evolve. But the key in the authenticity is that is the choice coming from me, right? Is this coming from me? Am I choosing this? Am I embodying this? As opposed to I'm doing this because I feel like it's the right thing to do and I feel pressured and it's everybody's external ideas that I'm taking on. Is this something that's coming from within, and is it coming from an empowered place? And that in itself is also has its own journey. So you ask me about the type of emotions. Oh gosh. Well, if you're going to break through your false self, like you like to call it, your matrix avatar, you're going to have to look at all the shells, all the protective layers,
Mm-hmm.
all of the restrictions, all of the energetic structures within your mind and your body that you've created, or that either whether it's something that you've thought you needed to create or as a response to your environment or the people around you or even the beliefs, you've got to break through that. And often when you're breaking through that, you're breaking through pain. You're breaking through heartache that you've maybe suppressed for a really, really long time. You're feeling anger that you need to feel so you can understand what your boundaries are and what matters to you and what you'll fight for and what you'll protect and what you'll defend and what matters to you and what you value, right? So a lot of the time people have this very, it's an unhealthy belief, and I would say also part of the matrix, because like people see spirituality on the outside, but really embodied true spirituality is really working with the human experience and the spiritual all in one,
Mm-hmm.
not separating the two. Is they think, oh, they're going to experience this nirvana when they finally discover their truth. But the reality is, truth is sometimes very complex and it's sometimes painful. And clarity doesn't always mean that. Sometimes it means facing some really ugly feelings within yourself and illusions that you have within yourself, and even lies that you've told yourself, and even ways that you've deceived yourself. So if we talk about emotions, I would say I'd had to deal with a lot of grief, things that I hadn't grieved within myself, and that's got a whole experience to it and journey to it. I'd say for myself, and it's different for each person, right? So people have to be mindful. It's different. Some people may have a particular relationship with sadness. For me, I had to understand and process a lot of sadness within myself. With others, maybe their thing is around anger. With others, it could actually be something like resentment. With others, it's bitterness, right? So you really have to honor the truth of the individual. And again, that's the work that I do. It's for people who really can feel themselves, knowing that they want their true path, their soul path, what's really, and really want it and own it, because that's the thing, right? You've got to own it, because you can be walking your path, but if you're not owning it and constantly choosing it, you can fall asleep, find yourself back asleep, right? So I hope that answers your question. There aren't specific emotions. The truth of it is, if you've got to look at what your relationship to something is and particular feelings. But I think the important thing to understand there is that it's not only joy. And what I
Mm-hmm.
will say, there is a lot of joy that comes through that. You've got to like clear out that stuff, clear out that
Mm-hmm.
difficulty, and then the joy does arise. And the joy is different to that crazy excitement that you can have, but it's that flowing of love and that understanding of the self and that understanding of that kind of peace of, yes, this is where I am supposed to be. And then sometimes it comes through as sparks that guide you into a particular direction, right? Where you know, yes, this is where I need to be going. And then sometimes it's like I said in the beginning of this call, this big heart opening. So the feeling of the authentic self and that authentic path is also really being able to own all of it and make
Mm-hmm.
space for all of it, and to not get too attached to it being only one thing and one
Mm-hmm.
experience.
I love it. Yes, you can be anything and everything, and you do not have to choose. This is so important. Thank you so much for sharing this. Well, I asked you before we started recording this podcast whether you would be willing to pull some cards. I asked you whether you've got any cards, and I feel like it's if you feel like doing it, it would be lovely to, as we're getting to the um, to close that interview, whether you can pull some cards for anyone who's watching and listening, but you choose the theme, or I'll leave it up to you.
Okay, cool. So you asked me for my most feminine deck, but there's a deck that I'm drawn to, so I'm going to work with that one.
Yeah,
If that's
choose any deck you're being drawn to. Yes.
And this is actually from one of my favorite readers. Her name is Cheryl Lee Harnish. She's really got like beautiful decks. I love working with energy. I love working with the with fractals and with understanding how energy works in the body, right? So I'm very drawn to that kind of imagery, and this deck works with that specifically. So let's see. Let's
Mm-hmm.
see a card for all those who are listening to this podcast now in the future. Oh, wow, it's popped up. What do they most need to hear? Oh, this is so beautiful. Oh. Okay, so we've got this card over here, which is, I want to make 100% sure, and this one over here, but we can see both of them are blue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if we look at both of them, if we look at this one specifically, it looks like the vocal cords, right? This, I think, is the card. And it's blue, like the throat chakra is blue, right? And then we've got this card over here, which I think is the card of freedom. I just want to check what the name is because I don't want to be wrong about what it's called. I know what it's about, but I'm not sure about what it's called. Yes, speak your truth. How beautiful.
Mm.
How beautiful. So this is speak your truth and this is Om. And because they're both blue, we know they're both talking about the throat chakra. But both of these cards are definitely talking about communication and speaking your truth and honoring your truth. And the throat chakra is really about that, right? And often we just think the throat chakra is about the speaking. But this card, the Om card, actually invites us to be in silence with ourselves and to hear ourselves. Because another part that the throat chakra governs is listening. Because throat chakra is about communication. And communication is also about being able to listen. And since we've got the Speak Your Truth card, what is really key that's coming through for me around that is that in order to speak your truth, you really have to start listening to yourself. Listen to what matters to you. Listen to yourself, like this card says, in those silent moments, what comes up for you when you speak to yourself and no one else is around, when no one else's views, opinions, what matters to them is around. What are you hearing yourself say? What are you feeling yourself feel? And speak that out loud to yourself and also hear yourself. Now, for others, I feel like what's very important is for them to say what they need to say, because also when we say it, we can hear ourselves say it. And a lot of the time, and I could even feel this being with you now is that when we speak those things out loud, right? We hear that, we can hear maybe the gaps in our own healing, or the opportunity for
Mm-hmm.
growth, or the path that we actually need to take. Because in order to make something happen, right, when we talk about spells in the spiritual community, those spells are, what are we speaking, what do we
Mm-hmm.
speak over our lives? And only when we really listen and speak those out for ourselves do we know the direction we truly need to follow. And I feel like that's what's coming through here. So affirming, so affirming, so
Mm-hmm.
lovely.
Beautiful cards. And is there a final message, anything else that you would like to leave the viewers and listeners with?
Oh, I'm sitting and I want to go like, so cheesy. I want to say, follow your heart, but it really is what I
Mm-hmm.
actually, what it really actually is what I want to say. You mentioned that earlier where you said, and I think this was before we started talking, that the heart is the bridge between the spiritual and the physical. And a lot of, like, the work that I do is about marrying the human with your soul.
Mm-hmm.
And what's so important about that is to really listen to the heart. And what happens to a lot of people is they think that listening to the heart means that they're just going to feel super inspired always, and that you're just going to have this inspiration, which it is. But sometimes we've got to listen and hear the heartache that we've experienced, because that's our heart telling us, hey, I don't know if this is right for you, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we've got to hear that too, and just want to deepen that message of understanding that following your heart is really also listening to it. Because once you hear that, oh, it's a little bit sad, and then you shift your path a little bit, and now it's happy, it's telling you, yes, this is
Mm-hmm.
where we need to go. This is what we need to do. So that's what I end off with.
Thank you. And finally, how can people work with you and where they can find you?
Awesome. I would be very happy to offer any of your viewers a 15-minute consult with me. So if that's something that they would love to do, they can find me on Instagram at nightingale.taryn. So it's my surname like it's spelled here, and then a
Mm-hmm.
dot, and Taryn, Tary, Nightingale like the bird nightingale. And they can find me there on Instagram and send me a message, or they can find me on my website at and it's my name, tarynnightingale.com. They can also check out my readings on YouTube at The Priestess Sophia. So they're majority relationship readings at the moment, and I think they
Mm-hmm.
might find some benefit there if they're keen. And yes, that's how they can work with me.
Mm-hmm. And I'm going to add all of the links to the description of the podcast. Thank you so much for coming to this podcast, for opening your heart. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it was lovely meeting you, Marta. And you have such beautiful energy, so heartwarming. And I really enjoyed being here with you. Thank you for having me as a guest.
Thank you. And I want to say thank you to all of the viewers and listeners. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye. Bye bye.